It started with something so small I almost ignored it. A patch of grass, maybe 3 feet wide, at the edge of my backyard. One morning, I noticed orange flags poking out of the ground, the kind contractors use to mark boundaries or utility lines. They stretched across the side of my lot like someone had drawn a new border overnight. I thought it was a mistake. But that tiny patch, that small line in the dirt, was where everything began, and where my life with the HOA turned into a nightmare. I had moved into the neighborhood for peace, wide lawns, polite neighbors, and an HOA that promised community harmony. But peace doesn't last long when you're living next to someone like Karen. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was the self-proclaimed queen of the subdivision. Head of the HOA board, self-appointed enforcer, and the kind of person who believed the world revolved around her rules. At first, she hid behind smiles and friendly reminders about lawn care or mailbox colors. But when I refused to let her dictate how I should trim my hedges, she decided to make my life her next project. Weeks after the orange flags appeared, a construction crew showed up. They were unloading gravel, fence posts, and concrete. I walked outside, confused, watching them unload on the very edge of my yard. When I asked what was going on, they said they were building a boundary fence for the community lot. That word, community, made my stomach twist, because there was no community lot there. That was my property, clearly outlined in my deed. I pulled out my documents that evening, double-checked the boundaries, and felt that creeping chill of disbelief turn into anger. The fence was being built inside my property line. The next morning, I went to the HOA office. It was a tidy little building with fake plants and inspirational quotes about neighborhood unity. Behind the front desk sat Karen, as if she'd been waiting for me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She claimed it was all a clerical error, that the association had recently updated parcel divisions. I didn't understand how that could even happen. My deed was clear. But when she showed me the new map, something stopped me cold. On that map, my backyard was smaller. A slice of my lot, about 12 feet deep, running the entire width, had been redrawn as common green space. I went home shaking. That night, I pulled every document I had, the original deed, the surveyor's map, even the title insurance. They all matched, until I found one paper I didn't recognize, a revised property transfer acknowledgement, supposedly signed by me. Except it wasn't. The signature looked close, but not quite. That's when it hit me. Someone had forged my name. From that moment on, I knew this wasn't an innocent mix-up. It was a setup, and Karen was behind it. I started digging quietly, asking neighbors if they'd had similar updates. Most shrugged it off, too scared to challenge the HOA. But one older resident whispered that Karen had rearranged several parcels in the past, always small sections of land, and somehow they all ended up benefiting the association. Days passed, and construction didn't stop. The fence went up, my lot was smaller, and Karen's smirk grew wider each time she drove by. But I wasn't about to let it slide. I hired a private surveyor. When he finished, he confirmed my worst suspicion. The new fence cut straight into my legal boundary by 11.7 feet. It wasn't an error. It was theft. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every light in Karen's house was off except one, her office window, glowing until after midnight. I knew she was planning something. Maybe she thought she'd gotten away with it. Maybe she thought I'd fold like everyone else. But I wasn't just angry, I was determined. Because if she had forged my signature once, I had to find out what else she had done. And what I uncovered next went far beyond a stolen strip of grass. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had buried something deeper, something bigger than just stealing a few feet of my land. The forged signature proved it wasn't random, it was a deliberate act. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Karen wasn't working alone. I started with public records. Every parcel in our community had a record in the county's online system: maps, deeds, and ownership changes. Most files were straightforward, but when I searched my address, the documents looked off. The scanned pages had mismatched fonts, uneven spacing, and blurry seals, almost like someone had copied parts of older documents and pasted them together. Still, one thing stood out: a signature from authorized HOA officer K. Madsen. That was Karen's full name. She had signed the approval form that transferred a section of my property into the common green zone. But the date on the signature was even stranger. It was 2 weeks before the board had supposedly voted on it. I felt my stomach twist again. She hadn't just approved it, she had planned it before any vote even happened. That night, I printed every page and spread them across my dining table. The papers covered every inch of it, forming a trail of signatures, stamps, and fake authorizations. It looked like a bureaucratic spider web, and Karen was right in the center of it. I decided to dig further, so I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning. The clerk, an older man who'd clearly seen every kind of mess possible, raised an eyebrow when I told him what I was looking for. When he pulled up the official record for my property, his expression changed. He scrolled through several pages, then looked at me and said quietly, "This version isn't supposed to exist." The version he showed me on his screen was different from the one Karen had filed. The real record, the one sealed in the county database, still showed my original boundary. My signature was untouched, my property was intact. But then came the bombshell. The file Karen submitted to the HOA wasn't in the county system at all. It was only in their private digital records. That's when I realized the forgery wasn't filed with the county, it was only used to convince the HOA members that the property line had changed. It was an illusion, and that illusion allowed her to sell a fake, common parcel to a local landscaping contractor who paid the association thousands for maintenance rights. Karen hadn't just stolen my land, she'd sold it. By the time I left the county office, anger had turned to adrenaline. I wasn't just a homeowner fighting back anymore, I was building a case. I started documenting everything: screenshots of emails, timestamps, and side-by-side comparisons of signatures. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. Karen had created at least 3 fake property transfers over the past 2 years. Tiny sections of people's lots, shaved off and labeled as public access zones, pathway extensions, or utility buffers. Each time, the HOA collected a contracting fee from local companies who used those strips for storage or landscaping. Every forged signature looked slightly different, but they all shared the same looping R, Karen's handwriting trait. She'd been sloppy. Then came the night that changed everything. While going through old HOA newsletters on the community website, I noticed a folder marked Board Reports Private. I expected it to be password protected, but somehow it wasn't. Inside were dozens of internal documents, budgets, contracts, and digital PDFs of parcel maps. Buried among them was a file named Boundary Updates 2023 Final. I opened it and my jaw dropped. The file showed 16 properties, all marked with subtle changes, small strips of land highlighted in yellow. Next to each one was a note: approved via signed acknowledgement. Every acknowledgement had the same fake format as mine. And then there it was, a spreadsheet of transactions. The HOA had received payments totaling nearly $72,000 in lot adjustment fees, but none of those payments were ever listed in the public financial reports. They were siphoned into a side account. The signatory? Treasurer K. Madsen. I sat back staring at the screen. My hands were shaking, not just from anger but from shock. This wasn't just about property theft, it was organized fraud. That same week, I hired a property attorney. When I handed him my folder, packed with printouts, comparison sheets, and screenshots, he didn't even look surprised. He'd seen cases like this before, though rarely on this scale. His advice was simple: document every interaction, avoid direct confrontation, and let the evidence build until we could file. But Karen wasn't the kind to stay quiet. As if sensing that I was closing in, she started escalating. I began receiving violation notices from the HOA, claims that my trash bins were visible from the street, that my lawn lighting didn't meet community standards, and that my mailbox color was non-compliant. Each fine felt like a message: back off. One night, I caught her walking along my property line with a flashlight, snapping photos. When she noticed me watching from my window, she didn't look embarrassed. She smiled. The kind of smile that says, "You can't touch me." But she was wrong. Because while she was busy sending threats and fake citations, my lawyer subpoenaed the HOA's financial records. Within days, we had confirmation. Multiple unreported bank accounts linked directly to Karen and her assistant treasurer. The funds matched the same lot adjustment payments from the spreadsheet I'd found. When the evidence was ready, my attorney prepared the lawsuit. It wasn't just about reclaiming my land anymore. It was about exposing an entire system built on deception. The night before filing, I stood in my backyard, staring at that new fence line, the one Karen had built to mark her victory. The moonlight hit the boards just right, casting long shadows across my lawn. I thought about how easily it could have gone unnoticed, how many others had lost property without ever realizing it. But that fence would soon become the symbol of her downfall, because once the lawsuit hit, everything she'd built, the fake documents, the secret deals, the stolen parcels, would start to crumble. I took a photo of the fence that night. It wasn't just evidence, it was a reminder that Karen thought she could rewrite boundaries and bend truth to her will. But soon she was about to face something she couldn't manipulate: the law. And when the papers were served the next morning, the look on her face said it all. The game had changed. When the lawsuit was filed, it felt like a switch had flipped in the neighborhood. One day, everything looked normal. Kids playing, sprinklers running, Karen pretending to wave at people during her morning walks. The next, whispers began. Everyone knew something had changed. The papers had been served directly to her house. The sheriff's deputy walked right up to her porch, handed her the envelope, and left without a word. For the first time since I'd moved in, Karen wasn't smiling. Within hours, the HOA group chat went silent. The weekly board meeting was postponed indefinitely. And those passive-aggressive emails she used to send about lawn violations, they suddenly stopped. My lawyer had filed not just for property reclamation, but for fraud, forgery, and financial misrepresentation under a non-profit association. The evidence was overwhelming: the forged deeds, the hidden accounts, the falsified signatures, and even the spreadsheet showing where the money had gone. It didn't take long for her confidence to crack. 2 weeks later, we received the first discovery response from the HOA's legal team. They tried to downplay everything, calling it a record-keeping oversight. But when my lawyer produced copies of county-certified deeds proving Karen's version was fake, their tone shifted instantly. Still, the real unraveling didn't happen in court. It started with the neighbors. As word spread about the lawsuit, other homeowners began checking their property lines. One family discovered their backyard fence had been built 5 feet inside the actual boundary. Another found their community walkway wasn't public land at all. It was theirs. Every discovery pointed back to Karen. One by one, people came forward. Old emails, signed adjustment forms, invoices marked lot maintenance contributions. Each piece of evidence fit perfectly into the puzzle. What began as my single complaint had grown into a collective storm. By the time the preliminary hearing began, there were 7 plaintiffs, all homeowners like me, standing together against the HOA. I'll never forget the first court session. The judge, a calm but sharp woman, went through every document carefully. When she reached the part where my signature had been forged, she asked Karen a simple question. "Did you authorize or instruct anyone to modify property records?" Karen didn't answer. She just stared ahead, her hands shaking slightly on the table. The silence said everything. From there, the hearing turned into a slow-motion collapse of her empire. The forensic handwriting expert confirmed the signatures were indeed forged. The county clerk testified that none of the parcel changes had been officially approved, and the accountant from the landscaping company admitted that every payment had been made directly to an off-the-books account, controlled by Karen and her assistant treasurer. Each revelation chipped away at the image she'd built, the perfect HOA president who claimed to protect property values. It took 6 months for the case to fully unfold, 6 months of depositions, motions, and sleepless nights, but every step of it was worth it. Because with each passing week, Karen's lies started surfacing like cracks in old paint. Eventually, even the rest of the HOA board turned on her. They claimed ignorance, insisting they had no idea she was handling side transactions. Maybe that was true. Maybe not. But once her name appeared on bank statements and authorization forms, there was no denying her guilt. The turning point came when my lawyer presented one final piece of evidence, an email Karen had sent months before the fence construction began. It was addressed to the contractor. In it, she wrote, "The property transfer will be finalized this week. You can start fencing once the documents are uploaded to our internal system." That email was dated 3 weeks before my forged signature appeared. When that was read aloud in court, you could feel the air shift. The judge leaned back, sighed quietly, and asked for a recess. Everyone in the courtroom knew it was over. 2 weeks later, the judgment was delivered. Karen was found liable for forgery, fraudulent property transfer, and embezzlement under an association entity. The HOA was ordered to restore every affected property to its original boundary, repay all collected lot adjustment fees, and dissolve the current board pending audit. And Karen, the woman who had ruled our neighborhood like a dictator, was personally fined and banned from serving in any community or non-profit leadership position for 10 years. When the judgment came through, I didn't celebrate right away. Instead, I walked to my backyard. The fence, the one she'd built to mark her victory, was still standing. But now, it felt different. I could hear the sound of hammers from 2 houses down, where another neighbor was tearing down a common access gate Karen had approved. One by one, her little symbols of power were being erased. The HOA was replaced by a court-appointed management company. They worked quietly, respectfully, no threats, no fake fines. Within weeks, the neighborhood started feeling like a community again, not a battlefield. A month later, when the restitution payments came through, I used part of it to rebuild my fence, exactly where it should have been all along. This time, I built it myself, board by board. I didn't just reclaim my land, I reclaimed my peace. But there was one final moment I'll never forget. A few days after the judgment, Karen's house went up for sale. The sign stood crooked in her front yard, half hidden behind the overgrown bushes she once lectured others about. No one stopped to talk to her anymore. The woman who used to patrol the streets with a clipboard now avoided eye contact with everyone. On her last day in the neighborhood, I saw her car loaded with boxes. She stood by the curb for a moment looking around, maybe realizing how quickly the world she controlled had slipped away. For a second, I thought she might glance my way. But she didn't. She just got in her car, started the engine, and drove off without a word. And just like that, the neighborhood was quiet again. It's strange how a few feet of stolen land can expose so much rot beneath the surface, but if I learned anything from it all, it's this. Corruption doesn't always hide in city halls or corporations. Sometimes it's right next door, behind manicured lawns, fake smiles, and endless community guidelines. Today, when I look at my backyard, I see more than property lines. I see boundaries that can't be redrawn, signatures that can't be forged, and the peace that comes only after the truth wins. And every time I hear someone mention HOA politics, I can't help but smile, because I know from experience that sometimes the loudest bullies fall the hardest.